As Lisa handed him the receipt, her eyes were now downcast, avoiding his gaze. James noticed the slight tremble in her hands. She knew she had messed up, but would she be able to confront it? Would she see him as the man he truly was, beyond the assumptions and stereotypes? Or was this just another reminder that no matter how high he climbed, some people would always see him through the lens of their own biases? The clock ticked louder in the otherwise quiet room. James stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. What was he going to do next? What would happen when the truth truly hit? Just as James was about to turn and walk away, something unexpected happened. A man in a suit, clearly a bank manager, approached the counter, his expression stiff. James could feel the shift in the air as the man came closer, but it was the way Lisa's eyes widened in surprise that caught his attention. The manager stopped beside Lisa, briefly glancing at James, then focusing on her. "Lisa, we need to talk about that transaction," he said, his voice low but firm. "I just checked the system. I'm afraid you've made a mistake with a high-profile client." The words hit James like a punch to the gut. High-profile client. So now they were going to acknowledge his success. Or was this just another layer of the same treatment, where he was only valuable when he fit the image they wanted? Lisa's face went pale. She was clearly caught off guard. "I didn't mean," she stammered, but the manager interrupted. "You need to understand the importance of recognizing the clients we serve," the manager said sharply, directing his tone more toward Lisa than James. "This could cost us if it happens again." James couldn't believe what he was hearing. It wasn't enough that Lisa had wrongly judged him. Now the bank manager was making it clear that the system had been set up to penalize her for something that wasn't even her fault. He had been seen as just another ordinary customer until the moment they realized who he was, and now Lisa was the one being treated like the problem. The silence in the bank felt suffocating as the manager turned away, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Lisa looked up at James, her expression a mixture of guilt and helplessness. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, two people caught in a situation neither had truly expected. But the tension didn't end there. James was left standing there, questioning everything. Was this what happened when someone who didn't fit the mold made it to the top? Was it all a game of appearances, where only certain people mattered once the numbers were right? And more importantly, how would he confront the systemic bias that had just been laid bare in front of him? The stakes had just been raised, but how far would he be willing to push back? James felt his anger rise as he watched the manager walk away, leaving Lisa standing there, still trembling. For a moment, the silence in the bank was deafening. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him, waiting for what he would do next. But this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the bigger picture, the bias, the assumptions, and the way people like Lisa were caught in a system that didn't care about anything beyond the surface. James took a deep breath, his pulse pounding in his ears. He wasn't going to let this moment pass without doing something. He turned to face Lisa, her face now flushed with embarrassment, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Listen," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I know what you did, and I know why you did it. But I also know that's not the real you." Lisa looked up, surprised by his words. He continued, "You made a mistake, and you'll learn from it. We all do. But that's not what defines you. What defines you is what happens next." Lisa's eyes widened, as if she hadn't expected him to say that. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the shame mixed with something else, relief maybe. For a brief moment, it felt like they were on the same side, caught in the same web of assumptions, both trying to make sense of a system that didn't care about their humanity. But just as the moment seemed to settle, there was a sudden interruption. The manager reappeared, his face tight with frustration. He had returned not to apologize, but to make one final statement. "Mr. Carter," he said, his tone clipped, "I'd like to personally ensure this doesn't affect your banking experience. Perhaps we can arrange a private consultation to discuss the matter further." The doors of the upscale downtown bank swung open, and in walked James Carter, confident, well-dressed, and carrying the weight of years of hard work and success. As the CEO of a thriving tech company, he was used to commanding respect. But today, as he approached the counter, something felt off. The bank teller, a young woman named Lisa, gave him a quick once-over, her smile tight and forced. "Sir, this line is for business account holders," she said, her tone clipped. James raised an eyebrow. He had come to deposit a sizable check, yet here he was, being second-guessed again. Lisa's assumptions about him were clear, and James had seen this kind of treatment before. But what happened next? She never expected the truth about who he really was. And when she found out, her regret hit harder than she could have imagined. Stay tuned to see how it all unfolds. James stood there for a moment, trying to hold back his frustration. He could feel the stares from a few others in the lobby, people who had probably already made their own assumptions about him. But this wasn't the first time he'd been judged based on appearances alone. Growing up, he'd often been underestimated because of the color of his skin, but that only fueled his determination to prove everyone wrong. Lisa's gaze shifted uneasily as James calmly placed his business card on the counter. He watched her face change from uncertainty to surprise, and then a hint of embarrassment. She glanced down at the card and then back at him, her smile faltering. "Wait, you're James Carter?" she asked, the words barely escaping her lips. James could see her scrambling to recover, but the damage was done. How would she handle the truth of who he really was? The tension in the air was thick. James felt a wave of tension wash over him as Lisa's expression shifted from disbelief to a forced politeness. She wasn't sure how to recover from her mistake, but James wasn't about to make it easy for her. His company, which he'd built from the ground up, had been worth millions for years. And now, after all the hard work, he was still being judged by shallow assumptions. It was a constant battle, not just in business, but in everyday interactions like this. Lisa stumbled over her words, trying to regain composure. I didn't know, Mr. Carter. I'm so sorry." Her voice was shaky, and James could hear the nervousness creeping in. Around them, the other customers shifted uncomfortably. Some were watching the scene unfold, whispering to each other, and a few exchanged knowing glances. It wasn't just about Lisa anymore. It was about the systemic bias that James had faced his entire life, and now here it was, playing out in front of him. As Lisa hurried to process his transaction, James couldn't help but wonder, was this a one-time mistake? Or was this how people, deep down, really saw him, no matter his success? James watched as Lisa fumbled with the paperwork, her hands visibly shaking now. It was clear she wanted to make up for her mistake, but her attempts only made things more awkward. The longer the silence stretched, the more tense the atmosphere became. Customers in line behind him exchanged glances, their eyes flicking back and forth between James and Lisa, waiting for something to break the tension. He could feel their judgment, the quiet whispering of the room, but he refused to give them the satisfaction of showing how much it stung. Lisa's discomfort was palpable. Her words came out in a nervous rush. I'll make sure to give you the best service. Everything will be processed right away, Mr. Carter." She finally looked up, her face flushed with embarrassment. James could tell she wasn't sure how to salvage the situation. It wasn't just her mistake anymore. It felt like everyone in the room was silently judging her for what had just happened. James took a deep breath, his anger simmering beneath the surface, but he held it in. He had been fighting battles like this his whole life, fighting against the narrow expectations people had of him based on his appearance. Yet here he was again, stuck in the same position, trying to decide whether to call out the bias or let it slide. As Tasha sat frozen, weighing his offer, the door to the cafe swung open, and in walked someone she never expected to see, Linda, her former manager. The sight of her made Tasha's stomach drop. What was she doing here? The tension in the room thickened. Linda's eyes met hers with a mixture of discomfort and something else. Was it guilt? She hesitated for a moment before walking toward their table. The millionaire's calm expression faltered for a second, and Tasha could sense something was off. "I didn't expect you to be here, Linda," the millionaire said, his voice tight. Linda didn't respond immediately, but Tasha could see her fidgeting with a small envelope in her hand. She handed it to the millionaire without saying a word. Tasha felt a rush of confusion. Why was Linda involved in this? Why was she here, after firing her yesterday? Her mind raced as she looked between the two, trying to piece everything together.